Asyle, the engineer, and the island. Week 39, Day 1. It was still raining buckets today, but there wasn't a lot else I could do indoors, so I spent the morning continuing to use the explosives machine in the rain and blasting the tunnel to the last lava tube I was mining. Around late afternoon, I managed to break through, though the tunnel might have been cleaner if I'd started from the opposite side. I was just a bit too far to the left, so the resulting passage was kind of narrow where the tunnels met. I had enough time to get one blast for ore out of the way before the day ended, mainly iron pyrite. As I wrapped up for the day and loaded the pyrite into the big electrolysis cell, I thought about how making and planting explosives would be so much easier and safer if I could move the explosives machine into the caves, but I don't have a passage big enough or a back strong enough for that. Maybe something I can work on later. Week 39, Day 2. The rain finally let up a bit today, but when I looked around the base to inspect the damage, the news was not good. Several of the solar reflection panels had been smashed to pieces, and buildings made mostly of clay, namely the kitchen, workshop, and lab, have practically begun to melt like sandcastles from the torrential deluge this past week. There's no getting around it. I need to rebuild them with concrete ASAP, and this could hardly be a worse time to do it. The lab's wind turbine of woven grasses had also been shredded in the high winds. In some ways, this was probably a good thing, otherwise the rest of the structure might have been damaged. Still, that's one more thing I desperately need to repair, otherwise there'll be no more explosives for mining. So, I kicked into high gear, starting first by replacing what broken solar panels I could with the spares I made the other day, for all the good it would do because of the intermittent cloud cover. At least I had enough backups prepared to replace about half of the broken panels. While I was up there conducting repairs, I had an idea for a way to make the panels more resilient to the wind, namely by allowing the wind to pass straight through. I retied the connection points on several panels so they would pivot on the same axis in a stiff breeze, while still being springy enough to return to their default positions when the wind goes away. I also tied the panels in a given row or column together so that they all had to flip together rather than shaking and rattling around individually, which might have caused them to slap into each other, cracking them. The next crisis to address was reinforcing the primarily clay buildings, but there was a big problem with that. In total, the kitchen, workshop, and lab have a structural volume of about 635 cubic feet, and if I were to replace it all with claycrete, at about 6.6% lime by volume, I would need 42 cubic feet of lime, or 150 batches. Even if I had time to cook lime around the clock again, like I did for my underwater dome, it would take me 18 straight sunny days to cook it all, which I can't count on. Maybe I can make that a long-term project. Again, I seem to be of the mindset that has totally accepted that I'm never getting out of here. But for now, I just need something that'll keep the rain off the clay, and I need it fast. No time for tiles, and even a surface coating of grout would need at least a day to cook and a day to set, and the pressure on the barometer is already starting to go down again. For now, I think the only thing I can do is scoop as much mud back onto the walls as I can, and cover them with fallen palm fronds and branches to make some sort of thatched covering, and there's no shortage of those lying around after the storm. I spent most of the morning covering the walls before it was lunchtime, and I could work on repairing the wind turbine. Firstly, I took most of the cloth I had stockpiled and cut it into a stronger replacement for the original woven grass panels. I considered taking advantage of the vertical support rod to make something more like sails, which would cause the whole structure to more resemble a big vertical pinwheel. They wouldn't get quite as much total torque as the old ones, but they would have a larger overall surface area, and would be easier to control and take down in high winds. Another problem would be that they would try to rotate both ways in the wind, same problem I had with the sand pump, but in this case I could mount one corner of a sail to the next mast over, creating a spiraling pattern that would force them to spin in one direction, as well as forcing a sort of updraft in the center to help ventilate the lab. However, I remembered that I'd considered this design for the original turbine, and decided against it because of the inevitable counter-torque that would be produced by the wind pushing on the sails at different radii. I did, however, take the opportunity to at least increase the size of the turbine and reduce its overall weight and complexity by replacing the flexible panels with sails and rigging, which would conform on their own to the radial variations in wind pressure. All that was really needed was to create a short crossbar at the ends of the turbine booms to affix the sails to, angled off of vertical to keep the sails rotating in the same direction in the wind. The new sails were about 2 meter by 1 meter triangles, so I had plenty of cloth available to rebuild all 6 turbine sails. I sewed 2 large swaths together into a square and cut them along the diagonal before hemming them up and coating them with latex for waterproofing. Next, I built a reel to control how much slack was on the sails from inside the lab. I connected this reel to a strong rubber band so that when wind speed is slow, it takes in the slack automatically to make the sail spin a bit faster, and when wind speed is high, it lets the slack out so the system doesn't spin too fast. As a final safety precaution, I made the connecting cords at the corners of the sails thin and weak, so they'll snap if the wind gets too strong. Easy to fix. I guess that's what's meant by the term fail-safe. With most of the emergency repairs done, I could finally get caught up on all the stuff that had been piling up due to bad weather. I took what copper ore I had and smelted it down into wire first and foremost, so I could get some lighting in the tunnels and dome. As for the lead, I figured it would just be easier to refine it by electrolysis later, as it would need to be in thin plates anyway. I didn't need to get the silver out of it that badly. Before the day ended, I went out to the forest and collected as much bamboo as I could, so I would have something to build an elevator out of for the shaft, though I again found myself frustrated by not having an easy way to get all the material into the caves in the first place. While I was out, I also gathered as much fruit from the forest floor as I could, and there was a lot of it, so I had to be content with leaving some behind before the end of the day. Week 39, Day 3. The heavy rains are back, but as far as I can tell, my ugly thatching is protecting the buildings. Now that I had a passage to the far tunnels, I decided I wanted to finish blasting out the ore there before moving on to the shaft, so I spent the morning working on that until I ran out of nitric acid. Part of the reason for this was that the wind turbine on top of the lab wasn't turning as fast as it used to, which was probably due in part to some calibration issues with the control reel, which I did my best to correct throughout the day. After lunch, I went to the workshop and spent some time breaking down the leaves from the bamboo I collected the other day into more paper and threads to make up for what I used repairing the turbine. I spent most of the afternoon working on this. At the end of the day, I remembered to load my electrolysis cell, but I was having second thoughts about the lead, as I wasn't sure how silver contamination might affect the battery's electrochemistry. I decided to just go with what works and plate the iron, which was, in some ways, what I needed more badly anyway. I considered ways to plate the copper too, but I didn't think I could easily turn the resulting plates into wires. Week 39, Day 4. The sun came out today, so I was able to get some smelting done. I did my morning forage and caught up on all the fallen fruit, eggs, and latex that I hadn't been able to get to in the forest. I then spent the morning smelting, again mostly wire, but also processing the lead for silver and battery electrodes. I stopped at lunchtime, pretty much out of smeltable ores, just as well, as the weather was already starting to turn again. I at least took the time while it wasn't pouring down rain to do some work in the workshop, tidying up and getting a few more loads of paper and thread processing. I had several more hours to kill at this point, so I decided that I might as well start digging a big hole where I wanted to access the lava tubes, the ideal site being between the lab and the house. I eventually made it down to bedrock and carved out a nice dirt ramp to get my stuff in and out easily. It was nice at least that it had gone overcast, and near the end of the day, there was a light shower to cool me off. I'll have to blast into the tunnel later, along with finding something to do with all that clay I dug up. No doubt I'll build something over the hole. Week 39, Day 5. I was woken up early by the wind and rain beating against the side of the house, and was unable to fully get back to sleep, even when I tried sleeping in the panic room, as the volume only increased as time went on. When I decided to just get on with the day, I could hardly even get the door open, the wind was blowing so badly. It was an honest-to-goodness typhoon. I could only hope and pray that my stormproofing measures for the turbine and solar tower were up to the task. That meant there was really only one thing I could do today, so after getting some breakfast from the underwater dome, I headed to the shaft and started building the elevator from all the bamboo I had stockpiled down in the tunnels the other day. I started by finding a spot in the upper terrace that had already partially collapsed, as I figured it would make a good place to naturally place a platform that could descend lower into the shaft without having to suspend it over the edge on a cantilever. I bridged the gap along the outside and inside edges of the terrace hole with a frame of bamboo, leaving a square hole in the center where I could start building the elevator itself, which again consisted of a simple, square platform which, for the moment, I did not place on or near the hole. I split a lot of bamboo into slats for flooring, but it took longer than usual without the help of the machines in the workshop. It was hard to work by lamplight, but I also took note of how peaceful and quiet it was down there. Another refuge from the storms outside, so insulated that no matter how hard they rage, I couldn't hear them at all through the mountainside. I stopped for a late lunch and to swap out the headlamp battery before building some pulleys and rope for the platform. Again, I had to shave the cord and twist it into rope by hand, which took a lot more time than usual, but it also reminded me of how hard things were when I first got here, how far I've come, and how much I've started to take for granted. At the end of the day, I assembled the rope, pulleys, and platform so I had something that would at least go up and down. The pulleys were hung underneath the static platform, and likewise the ropes were tied to the underside of the elevator, though I had to tie them to little pegs to make sure that, at full extension, the elevator was level with the platform. Unfortunately, today I didn't have time to add a counterweight, and if it wasn't for my pocket watch, I would have probably kept working until late into the night, with no means to perceive the passage of time other than my own fatigue. The storm continued to rage outside, so I decided to try sleeping in the dome tonight. It's the first time that it's actually felt safer than my house. Week 39, Day 6. In the morning, the rain was gone, so I went out and inspected the damage. The sails on the lab broke off at the masts, as expected, so it was an easy fix to tie them back on. The solar panels were high enough off the ground to be safe from wind-blown debris, and were sufficiently damped to avoid being ripped apart. A few chips and hairline cracks maybe, but nothing major. The thatching on my buildings got shredded a bit, but it otherwise kept them from being completely eroded away. Some of the chicken houses were knocked over in the storm, so I stopped and applied a few repairs to them. Shame about the eggs. While I was out, I also gathered fallen branches and fronds to refresh the protective thatching on my buildings. Even so, while the sun was out and the solar kiln wasn't being used for anything else, I thought it would be wise to start stockpiling some lime, so I got that process started between other tasks. My axe was toast from yesterday, so I spent some time sharpening it in the workshop, as well as making a lot more rope for the elevator shaft. I remembered to check on the electrolysis cell, and although I left it running too long, I'd learned my lesson from this in the past, and only threw in enough iron ore to make one plate at a time, so that way they don't get too thick to process. I removed and trimmed out the plates for my next motor/generator, and got the electrolysis cell restarted. I stopped for lunch at that point, and took some time to move a bit more equipment down into the tunnels, namely the torches I took down from the courtyard, which should help me see when I'm working in the tunnels, though I am not a fan of the smoke. I also finished using the lead I smelted the other day to build batteries for the dome and underground lighting system, though because I was in a hurry, I just used some of my spare cylindrical pots for battery bodies, and they seemed to work just as well. I felt like the weather was forcing me to constantly play catch-up, so I decided to disrupt my routine a little and spend some time this evening blasting my way into the lava tube below my pit. It means I won't have as much to work with tomorrow if the weather is bad, and I need to get as much equipment down there and under cover as I can. I managed to get in 2 blasts at the end of the day, going a bit overtime, but that seemed to be enough to break into the cave, and in a bigger way than I was expecting. I only dug a couple of meters into the rock, but the shockwave from the blast, combined with the weight of the dirt overhead, was enough to collapse a sizable hole in the roof of the lava tube. Plenty big enough for me to move stuff inside later, but it also created a bit of a problem. The hole led straight down into the lava tube, like a well, and I can't just throw my equipment down there. I need to construct a ramp or staircase. Still, it was more than I was expecting to be able to get done today, so I got ready for bed somewhat satisfied. Week 39, Day 7. It was overcast today, but not raining, which was unusual, but I absolutely loved it. I've been so busy this week that I almost forgot that today was my Sabbath. And yet, at the same time, I felt like I shouldn't let the good weather go to waste. As always, I started the day by doing my morning chores, transcribing my recordings, and listening to the sermon on the radio. It was about the importance of thankfulness today, and I've been thinking lately about how fortunate I've truly been, in spite of the obvious circumstances. There are few things I hate more than a disaster served sunny side up, but I've gotten really lucky with all the resources the island has provided. All these living machines God made for me. I rarely stop and give thanks because I'm always on to the next problem that needs to be solved, but perhaps now is a good time to change that. I need to build a building over the pit I blew out yesterday anyway, So why not a place dedicated to worship and giving thanks? Why not a chapel? It feels a bit overdue, considering how much God has gotten me through here already. After listening to the sermon, I went out and collected some bamboo and sticks to start building a frame for the chapel, which I didn't consider particularly heavy labor. After all the work I put into building the underwater dome, this felt like utter child's play. I went for the traditional cross-shaped floor plan, with the pit I blasted in the center of the cross and the ramp I dug down the center hallway. As has become my trademark, I made the passage framework out of bamboo arches about 10 feet wide. The long end of the cross was about 16 feet long, and each of the other segments of the cross formed alcoves 10 by 10 feet each. I had to stop and pile up a makeshift covering for the pit as I went, so I wouldn't accidentally fall in while I was building the frame. The long end of the cross pointed in towards the center of my compound, while the rest of it pointed east-northeast, roughly in the direction of Jerusalem. This building had a larger floor plan than most of the others I'd built, so it took me most of the day to finish building the frame. Besides, I was taking my time and trying to go easy on myself. Blooper Reel. The lab's wind turbine of woven grashes, whatever the heck those are. Next, next, just as well as the weather was already starting to turn again. Blech. It was nice at least that it was it was nice it was nice at least that it was nice at least that it had gone it was nice at least that it had gone overcast near the end of the day. Read the words without without having to suspend it over the edge of a cantilever, which, for the moment, I didn't. Where's my mouse? So I decided to try sleeping in the dome tonight, and got the electrolysis cell. Hey there, thanks for listening all the way to the end. That was a lot of mess to clean up, and there's no indication that the storms are going to stop coming. So, if you want to see if my stormproofing measures hold up, you can press the like and subscribe buttons to get notified as soon as the next episode is ready. We'll see if a year's worth of hard work gets washed away or not. Now, I'm not here to take up an offering with these videos, even though I'm building a church, but it would help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you enjoyed it enough to watch it this far, you can press the like button to say so, and to tell the algorithm to do a little bit of that sharing for you. Also, if you'd like to chat about some of your own stories and perspectives on the episode, maybe about a time you had to hastily prepare for bad weather, or a time you helped build a church, feel free to share them in the comments section below. I genuinely love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.